So you've got a landlord for your business who's suing you. What do you do? Well, that's going to depend on your situation with your business. However, you certainly don't want to ignore it. Depending on what state you're in, here in Georgia, for example, where we're located, eviction actions move very, very fast. Within 7 days, you could be evicted, and the landlord could have a judgment against your business, against you personally, and have the ability to collect it against your assets. You don't ever want to get to that point without having consulted with an attorney already. If you've already got a landlord suing you for an eviction, you are in a 5-alarm fire, full-blown emergency where you needed to contact an attorney a month ago. And you need to probably stop watching this video right at the end and immediately contact an attorney, because you are in a very serious situation that could lead to major, major problems, and you need to deal with that right now. Hopefully, you're not quite to that point yet. Hopefully, you're just behind on the rent. Maybe the landlord's threatening to evict you, threatening to do some things. Well, what do you do? Now, again, this is not legal advice, obviously, for informational purposes only. Every situation is different. My main focus is businesses and business owners in particular. So, I'm not going to talk very much about, getting evicted from your apartment and things like that. My focus is on businesses that have a commercial lease, and commercial leases that may or may not have been personally guaranteed by the owner, which, by the way, makes all the difference in the world, because if you didn't personally guarantee that commercial lease, then the landlord can't come after you personally and get at your personal assets. They can only get at the assets of the business, in which case, if you were thinking about maybe closing down the business, maybe you can just move out and let the chips fall where they may. And if the landlord's saying they're entitled to $1 million and the business doesn't have any money, then maybe they just don't ever get paid. But if you personally guaranteed the lease, now the landlord can come after you personally to try to collect against you personally and go after your personal assets and do all kinds of bad stuff, in which case, we may need to talk about options there in terms of, seeing if they'll settle. If they won't settle, you may have no option other than to maybe file a personal Chapter 11 case to deal with it that way and enforce a payment plan and keep them from taking your assets. So I mentioned Chapter 11. A lot of people are surprised. They think that, I thought Chapter 11 was only available to huge corporations. Well, that's partially true. Of course, a lot of the Chapter 11 cases you hear about are for large companies, but most people don't realize there's literally a small business section of the Chapter 11 code, of the bankruptcy code, that was just enacted 6 years ago in 2019. That applies to if your debts are under a certain threshold. Here it's currently 2026. The threshold is $3.4 million. That changes from time to time. It will go up with inflation. But if your business or businesses collectively in a group are under $3.4 million adjusted annually, then they could qualify under the Small Business Reorganization Act. You could, potentially deal with a personal Chapter 11 case in the situation I mentioned, for example, where you've got a landlord coming after you personally for leases. And so I want to talk a little bit about what Chapter 11 can do in terms of dealing with leases. And there's really two different scenarios that we run into. And so scenario one, you want to get out of the lease for whatever reason. You need to close the location. It's too expensive, can't afford it. And if outside of Chapter 11, well, if you just move out, breach the lease, now the landlord can say, hey, you owe me all this rent and plus future rent. Oh, is this a 10-year lease? They could try to charge you for that whole 10 years. And if you just ignore that lawsuit, now they can get a judgment against your business and you personally, if you personally guaranteed it. But now once they've got a judgment against the business, they can put a lien on your assets and garnish bank accounts. And you wake up one morning and you can't pay payroll and your company's just over. And that is not a fun place to be. Hopefully you talk to an attorney long before it ever gets to that point. But one great tool, Chapter 11 can be a great tool for dealing with that sort of situation, because it caps what a landlord can collect against your company and potentially could cram it down and force them to accept pennies on the dollar. And they don't necessarily even have to agree to it, right? You can drag along creditors in Chapter 11 as long as you are in compliance with all the requirements of getting a Chapter 11 plan confirmed. So you see this a lot with retail locations, restaurants, and stores, where you hear about, this retail chain closed a bunch of stores and filed Chapter 11. Well, the reason they do that is because Chapter 11 is the best way to get out of leases and clear out that debt and not have to, and save your company and not have to worry about this landlord coming after you for, who knows, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars and potentially putting you out of business. So Chapter 11 can be a very, very effective tool for dealing with a situation where you need to get out of a lease and don't want to have to worry about this huge liability you could have for breaching the lease. On the flip side, there's another scenario where Chapter 11 can be very effective, and it's actually the opposite situation, which is where you don't want to lose the lease. I've seen this from time to time where maybe you have a below market lease that you got in at a good time, and for whatever, and you want to make sure you don't lose it, right? Because there's some value there. Or, maybe you've got a restaurant that if you lose this lease, moving a restaurant would be so cost prohibitive, you're basically talking about shutting down. And so there may be situations where you just need a little more time to get current on the lease, and the landlord is threatening to evict you, and you're worried that if you lose this lease and get evicted, you're basically out of business, which, for a restaurant, for example, that's you're out of business probably if you get evicted, restaurants closing, that's a big problem. Well, one solution to that is if we file Chapter 11, now we can save the business. Now we can, stop the automatic stay that you get with a Chapter 11 filing, stops any eviction action in its tracks. Eviction gets canceled. We now get several more months to come with a plan, and we're going to need to catch up the arrearage on the lease, and if there's a dispute over what's owed, that can get sorted out in the court after you file Chapter 11. But Chapter 11 can be a very effective tool for stopping an eviction and allowing you to catch up the lease arrearage and make sure you're able to save your business. Now, we won't have an unlimited amount of time to do that. You've got it's actually 3 to 7 months or so to what's called assume and cure the lease. So this does happen from time to time. I do see situations where clients, they got to have this lease. They can't lose it. And Chapter 11 would be an opportunity to assume and cure the lease. And it's going to depend on your situation, of course, if Chapter 11 filing makes sense. Going to, very much depend on the performance of the business, and does it make sense to save it? Does the cost of going through the Chapter 11 process and all the work involved with that, does it make sense to do that? But I have had great results for clients who were at risk of going out of business due to an eviction, where we were able to stop the eviction, get the rent caught up, and put together a restructuring plan and save the business. So if that's you, you're going to want to talk to an attorney as soon as possible. If you're located here in Georgia, I would encourage you to reach out to Keck Legal. Our website is kecklegal.com. That's www.kecklegal.com. Thanks, everybody.